Hi, my name is Sarai Cook, and I'm with the National Trauma Awareness Initiative. We just bring awareness to trauma and how trauma affects different things in people's lives, how it affects how we progress in life from early adverse childhood experiences to adulthood. Um, right now, we have three generations of women. So we have my mother here, myself, and my daughter. And we're going to talk about intergenerational trauma, and we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences and how we think that those experiences are still affecting us and how they may be hindering us. And we also have some policy suggestions for how governmental agencies that are hoping to put people on level playing fields or offer resources can better do so. And I think that we have all three of us have a valuable insight into this because we have the lived experience with adverse childhood experiences. I have a lived experience with being incarcerated. And I'll let the other women in my family talk about their own experiences, but we have that lived experience piece also coupled with the theory from education and work experience. I myself am an attorney. I've worked with people coming out of prison and worked on policy issues with reentry from a period of incarceration. I've been also a participant, and I've received services like food stamps, low-income housing, medical help with medical, um, even welfare benefits. I've received financial aid from school. So all of these government benefits, that they helped me along the way. They really helped me to survive and to be able to educate myself. But trauma does play a big part in the equal access to these resources. And so I think going forward, it's important for lawmakers and policymakers to understand how trauma affects our own experience and how we're able to access these resources, and then also how we're able to wean ourselves off of needing these resources, and also much more. So Mom, I'll have you introduce yourself, and then Isabel, I'll have you introduce yourself. Maybe you can just talk about who you are and your education level and like your experience with these issues, and what systems you've had to access or you have accessed in your journey.
Okay. So my name is Sandra Geary. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and um, I would say that I had access to public assistance when I was a young mother, and so food stamps and healthcare and um, educational benefits, of course, took out student loans and grants and that sort of thing for my education. I owe a huge debt to the state of Washington, I feel, because they had so many resources available when I was trying to get an education. What else? I also am the parent of a person who was incarcerated, and so I have a specific point of view about how families are encouraged or discouraged from interacting with their family members who are incarcerated. And I also have lived experience with homelessness and childhood abuse and marginalization because of my source of income, and just as a professional have experienced different uh, challenges, I guess, as a person with lived experience in poverty, and also because I fostered my granddaughter, who will be speaking next, for a period of time during her childhood, and just having to play dual roles. So I know it's so interesting that I even want to talk about that, because I know that's not really the focus of um, this discussion, but I feel like it's pertinent in that uh, the supports that people have today. Oh, I was also in the foster care system. So the supports that people have today were non-existent when I was young, some of them. And I see governmental agencies going in a good direction, I guess. And I feel like I have a contribution to add to that.
Thank you. Isabel?
Hey everyone, my name is Isabel Coronado. I'm a member of the Muscogee Creek Nation by way of my mother, and then my father is Mexican and lives in Mexico. I primarily grew up in Oklahoma, I claim, and I went to my tribal college, transferred to a four-year university, and then on to my master's degree, and graduated with a master's in public health in 2019, the age of 21. I experienced several different systems throughout my life. One, of course, being the incarceration of my mother, which I think was the most significant thing that happened in my childhood. Like my grandmother said, she fostered me or took care of me during that time. And I think I know I've used that experience to really find my path in what I do now. I just finished up with a 2-year kind of set up fellowship called The Next 100, which is a progressive think tank for the next generation of policy leaders. And I really learned how to use policy as an agent for change. And so I wanted to use that agent for change to change the way policymakers view the issues that children are, how they are impacted by parental incarceration, but also to bring in the lens of indigenous mass incarceration that's happening in our country. I was also impacted by the immigration system because my father was deported when I was a child. And so I had to spend part of my childhood going back and forth to Mexico to visit him and his side of the family because of borders. Lastly, I think a lot of the other services that were mentioned, such as healthcare, food stamps, student loans, and still in crippling debt because of student loans today, and will be for a while until we have that changed. And then also birth control. I think growing up, it's really easy to have the stigma once you have an incarcerated parent or family members that have endured certain things, then to be viewed in that light. And I remember in my education system being thought that I was going to be incarcerated myself or become a teen mom or become drug addicted, were stigmas that I had to fight through. And I think something that really helped me, or two things that really helped me, is despite those things, continuing on my education and also staying on birth control. Lastly, I really want to mention how policy and government can continue to support families like mine is by having these services be accessible, so people truly understand the services that are out there. The number one thing I always say is government needs a better PR. Even maybe an organization or PR, somebody who's out there constantly giving out information to Americans on what goods and services there are. Because I've known the last 2 years spending on policy is things are so meticulous and you really have to go in and dig for them. And the average person isn't going to do that unless it's word of mouth or it's on the TV or somewhere that's more accessible. So that's really important to me, that people are accessing the goods and services that are out there.
Yes.
Thank you, Isabel. Mom, you had mentioned, we had a conversation, you had mentioned about being in the foster care system, aging out of the foster care system, and
Mhm.
seeing that a lot of the resources that are there now that weren't there when you were growing up.
Mhm.
Can you talk, I guess, a little bit more about that and how you think that's helpful and how we can do more of that?
Well, I can say that I'm not proud of it, but I am jealous of the kids that are aging out of the foster care system now. I got pregnant at 14 and was pretty much just cut loose to go get public assistance and find a place to live and raise a child. And I did not know the first thing about raising children. Of course, I was a child myself. And I didn't know, I mean, I had a job. I worked at Denny's as a waitress until I was too pregnant to do that anymore. But you know, I didn't know how to manage money. I didn't know how to what Isabel said about accessing what services were available. I had no idea. You know, there is an informal communication system in communities of poverty, I think, that where back then we stuck up for each other. And so if a new resource came out and somebody learned about it, then it, you know, spread like wildfire in the community. But and I've seen that happen over and over again. But relying on that word of mouth is it is inadequate. And I didn't know, I did not know how to manage the first thing. Like you and I talked about, Sarai, about filling out a FAFSA. I mean, I didn't know anybody that went to college. No one in my family, as far as I knew, went to college. So, um, you know, I didn't know the first step. And I think I was fortunate in that the first college that I did go to, um, they had testing, which was really helpful to kind of point me in a direction. They had student services that you know, someone sat down with you and helped you to fill out the FAFSA. So um, those things were helpful.
What would have helped you at 14 and you're out on your own and you're working at Denny's and you're pregnant? What, how could you have been engaged and you would have felt like it was helpful? Because even, you know, with having all that, the adverse childhood experiences, it's hard to trust people. You don't know who's telling you the truth or, you know, so
Mhm.
how could people engage you? Can you think back to that time and think about,
You know, I think probably uh, I'm pretty sure I didn't have it very many peers, but as far as having peers that had lived through what I was living through, but that would have been helpful to recruit people who um, did age out of the um, foster care system or who had overcome adverse conditions and were able to succeed, to recruit those people to mentor me. That would have been super helpful. Just to kind of, you can't really normalize the situation, but at least humanize it. I love that term, Isabel, that you used earlier about humanizing language. I think that people who have had similar experiences are able to humanize their language in a way that others that haven't had those experiences are not able to.
see, that's one of the biggest things that that's how I learned about being trauma informed. And I learned about being trauma informed because I, you know, grew up like going to Indian health services, you know, when I was a little older, and the way that they treated me, I felt human, I felt normal, like because I think that Indian health services has had to be trauma informed without calling it that for a very long time.
Mhm,
So then when I went to Kaiser Permanente, they were kind of treating me like that when no other healthcare system had. So that's,
mhm,
I was like, okay, I feel like a human here. the way they talked to me, it was like on the same level. They weren't embarrassing me. They weren't talking down to me.
Mhm.
And I think that's a huge barrier to people accessing resources, is when people are dehumanizing them and talking down to them, or making them feel like they're weird in any way for whatever they're going through.
Mhm.
Yeah. And a huge place, I'll just skip over to this, that we get dehumanized is in with the student loans stuff. And I know that you had it way harder than I've had it, Mom, as far as them harassing you. And, they don't really do that anymore.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, you can fill
Um,
out a piece of paper and explain why you can't pay. And they're like, okay, before they would take your money out of your check, and they would charge you exorbitant amounts for, like, I think you had a $1,200 payment before, right? Or I don't know.
I think I still do. Fortunately, they're on hold.
Back in here,
Unfortunately,
remember, like 20 years ago, you couldn't pay it and they were just coming after you like crazy.
right. So one of the things that is driving that, I think, is interest rates. And it's interesting to me, this is another area where I'm a little jealous of the people that came after me, in that I ended up with a student loan at a time when the interest rates were pretty high, 8%. And so that really is what determines how much you're paying monthly, is what the interest rate is. So, yeah. And
Can
there's
I
no
add
way
on
to reduce it. There's no way to refinance it and reduce it. They will only reduce it like 0.5% or something. And so I just feel hopeless.
Okay, so that feeling of hope, real quick, that feeling of hopelessness. Now, how does that tie in with your trauma?
Well, that's a great question. My trauma response is usually fight rather than flight or freeze. And so, or flight, I guess. But so I have a tendency to just, if I'm hopeless, then I just pretend like it's not important. It's not
Just
important to
okay.
me to pay those student loans back. And and that's what put me in a position of being harassed because I didn't pay it for a period of time. So, yeah. I don't know, like, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we're back on our payment plans.
Okay, Isabel, sorry, you had something.
Yeah. Well, so it's going to tie into this, but I was just speaking on another panel the other day, and I was making the connection between that education is actually generational, and that's why it's so important. And even though we're talking about right here, I was connecting it back to when granddad, your grandfather, Mom, is a survivor of boarding schools, and that was one way that education has been generational, because of stripping him of language and tradition and customs and all these things, had its impact throughout the generations.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're seeing today with student loans, is, as you can see, all three of us have student loans, and
Mhm.
it's impacting if we can buy a house.
Mhm.
Really, that's the number one, because I know for me, I'm like, oh, I don't know. In the US, I don't know if I could ever buy a house. That's why I'm
Mhm.
thinking like maybe Mexico, because it's more affordable over there. But that's just one connection that I'm seeing, how incredible and beautiful a tool education is, but
Mhm.
also the downfalls and other negative consequences that can come with it.
Yeah. So I think that I knew that I needed an education because, Mom, you showed me that, and I was in classes with you sometimes, and I saw that with other people around me, that education was important. And then I showed Isabel that, and
Mhm.
there are other things, like when I got my job with the federal government, United States Department of Energy. Mom, you filled that. You didn't fill that specific application out for me, but you filled out a general one for me. And without you filling that
Mhm.
out for me, I would never have done that, because it's too
Mhm.
much. It was too overwhelming. too much. And then like Isabel with you, helping you, making sure your FAFSA was done on time, or different scholarship opportunities. That's, if your parent doesn't know, a lot of times, like, how are you going to know?
Right.
Because they're not teaching you that in school. Maybe they are now a little bit more, but they're not. It's kind of like,
Also, that comes to connections. Like, that's a part of your connections in your network that can help a lot with that, because now I know there's a lot more after school programs or different programs that will, one, pay for the FAFSA fee, to help you fill it out, and really hold your hand during that process. But how would we have ever known that without having a network? And I don't know, like, so one of my networks is Center for Native American Youth. Like, there are several different opportunities I've gained through them because of them just knowing me. And that's another important thing of this generational things, is how wide that network is, and who we know, and just in the general public, who everybody else knows.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I just thought of something too, Isabel. You had a sorority.
Yeah.
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 In college. And
Mhm.
I remember thinking, how ingenious is that,
Mhm.
that you had that you accessed that, and you were able to make connections and have, be resourced in that way. I could never have imagined myself as part of a sorority. It was so far outside of my field of imagination. I couldn't, I just couldn't imagine it. So if I can't imagine it, then I can't do it.
Yeah, I actually had a lot of, like, the pre-law summer institute before I went to law school. That gave me great connections. I still have friends from that, great
Mhm.
resources. I was in the entrepreneurship program at University of Portland. So all of these, like, summer programs and different programs and sororities and anything that people can get involved in. And like we were talking about earlier, Mom, just having the access to see someone like you that's okay. So I use the term in the fishbowl, when we're
Mhm.
in the fishbowl. So I'm a
Mhm.
fish, I'm in a fishbowl, life is happening around me. I don't know what's on the outside of that. I only know what I'm experiencing. And I think, I'm sure all three of us have been inside that fishbowl and then gotten out,
Mhm.
and then saw it back in, and saw how, like, blind I was, and like how there were all these resources, and then there were all these things that I could have done differently. But I had to get out of it first.
Mhm.
And so I guess having those role models and mentors and stories and people to show you, okay, I was where you're at, and here's the steps that I took. Here's what you can do. I know, like, even with having a criminal record, I go and I speak places and I tell them, you can get a passport with a criminal record. And they're like, I can? Or you can go to
Yeah.
school, yeah, even though you have a criminal record, or you can do this, because there's these things that people say, and I don't know where they come from, that these limiting beliefs are these things. They're like, oh, you can't get a passport because you have a criminal record. And then just people just believe it.
Right.
You can't do this, or you can't work for the federal government, or you can't, be an attorney because you have a
Mhm.
criminal record, and people just
Mhm.
believe it. So it's like, what are all of those things, and kind of fleshing those out and saying, what are all those things that people think they can't do, and it's just not true.
Mhm.
And then, like, you showed me about school and I showed Isabel, so it's kind of like it's passed down, right? And it's like,
Well, and I was just thinking that it's not only that it's passed down, but it's also passed up. One of the things that has been very educational for me is watching you, Sarai, and both of you actually, um, go for experiences that cost money. For instance, something that not everybody knows about Sarai is that she has gourmet taste when it comes to food, and she can zero in on the best restaurant in any town that she's in. I don't know how she does it. I don't know if she follows her nose or what, but I think that she's able to do that because early on she was making good money, and she sought those experiences out. She sought quality food sources out. She went to good restaurants and treated herself to things like that. And so, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, wow, you can do that? You can find like the best food in town and go treat yourself to it. Experiences like that. And it's those experiences then that show you what's possible in the next area of life.
Yeah. I want to talk about two things before we're done. Isabel, I want to talk about our experience with ensuring that you were on birth control so that you would not become a teen parent. Bobby, you were a teen parent. I was a teen parent, and I was like, I just don't want that for you. I just didn't want that for you. I didn't want that for my grandchildren. I don't want that for my great grandchildren. I was like, how can we stop this? Because they're nothing against teen parents. I'm a teen parent, you're a teen parent, but it's so hard.
hmm
It's so
And
hard.
you delay a lot of things as a result of being a parent. Like I delayed my education, I delayed a lot.
So it's so hard. And then if you watch the show Teen Mom, I used to watch that with
Never
Isabel
heard of
all
it.
the time. It follows it follows a pattern. Being a teen mom follows a pattern, the relational pattern, the financial pattern, the educational pattern, all that. It's just such a struggle. Life is such a struggle. And I just didn't want that for Isabel. So I think when she turned 16, I was like, you will get on birth control. But then the doctors tried to stop me. They made me feel bad. They shamed me. They made me feel bad. Well, is she even sexually active? I said, I don't care. And I had to fight through that shame and to even continue to try to keep her on birth control, because they were just really shaming me and not wanting to do it and trying to put up barriers. The way that birth control is, they don't have to do it like this, but they won't give you birth control. Like if you miss a month or something, or you don't go in at the right time when you're ovulating, they won't give you birth control. You have to wait another month. That's, that doesn't work. That's not a good policy. And I don't think that you have to do that. I think, and I'm not sure, why they're doing that, why doctors do that, why, but there has to be a better way. And then, there was one time I was in law school in Kansas City, and I used to take Isabel to a tribal clinic in, where was
Your
it?
Haskell.
Near Haskell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
North.
clinic there. It was a holiday weekend. She was going to Mexico for the summer, and that was the last day before she went. They canceled my appointment. So I called the head of IHS, Yvette Rubidoux, or I emailed her, the head of IHS, and I said, my daughter needs her birth control. They are closing down this clinic early. There's no reason for that. We're on our way, from a 2-hour drive. And they reopened the clinic and apologized and said there was a misunderstanding. And I know I probably went overboard with that. And I went overboard. I even told Isabel to not be completely honest about some things, because they wouldn't let her get her birth control. But you know what? She doesn't have a kid today. She's 25 and no kids. So I feel like I did what I had to do. But it was like a struggle, right?
Yeah.
It was like a fight.
It was.
And it's very frustrating to have to do that, because most people wouldn't have that passion that I had about it, and that fight into I'm gonna email Washington DC. Okay, I'm gonna do. Oh no, you will.
You say that, but you're with this a lot of things.
Most people aren't like me.
Yeah,
crazy like that. If I want to get something done, it's getting done, and just your average everyday person wouldn't do that.
No.
And so we need to not have those barriers, because everybody should not have to
Right.
fight so hard to get birth control.
Yeah, I think for my point of view and perspective is, I think my mom did the right thing with that choice. And even though it's also my body, my choice too, in the long run, I really respected that. And she's right. I'm 25 and no children. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't even fathom like having to have that responsibility and to have done everything that I've done thus far. It just wouldn't have been possible. Like my grandma, it would have probably most likely been delayed. And I think overall, not only our healthcare providers kind of sketch with this, but like even the general public, like it's not a topic that we necessarily talk about a lot. And when I would tell my friends like I'm on birth control, like, oh my gosh, like my parents would never let me be that young and get on birth. They think that's going to open me up to having more sex. And in all reality, like child's going to do what they're going to do. And so I think having the conversation and openly and honestly, like birth control is a really big savior in this generational cycle of poverty, unless I just don't see it any other way.
You know, it's interesting because part of my story is I gave birth 3 times by the time I was 21. So that at 21, I went in and requested a tubal ligation. And they did not want to do it. They did not want to do it. Even though I told them I have had 3 children and I can't raise any more children. I can't do this. But I had a similar experience with that in trying to be sterilized.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a fight just to get what we need and what we know we need. And that's the difference between what I felt in a trauma-informed environment. I was like, okay, I'm not the doctor, but I know my body and this is what I need. And they said, okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's
So there is something that I want to talk about a little bit. We had talked earlier about in an educational environment, how do we provide trauma-informed educational environments?
yeah.
And so I started thinking about it after we talked that it probably was right about the time when you were in law school and were struggling to take tests. And I noticed that colleges were providing just more assistance for people who they deemed to have learning disabilities. And I think there is, beyond learning disabilities, there are also trauma responses that require some accommodation. And like, for instance, we're taught when we do workshops or groups, therapy groups, to provide permission for people to get up and walk around if they need to, or to be active, because some people can only learn in an environment where they are able to get up and walk around or be active. So it's a learning style accommodation, I guess. And I don't know, Isabel, if you know about that, but I know, Soraya, you've had some experience with that.
Yeah, well, I think I have a lot of executive functioning deficits. And then I do have learning issues and memory issues. And I do have a learning disability. And I was at the bottom of my class at law school. And I did have to need accommodations to take those tests that I had to ask for. Like, I went and sought it out and then had to get a diagnosis and then had to write a letter to the school and had to know what I needed. And it still wasn't good enough. I could have used a lot more help. And then if I got a lot more help, then maybe I would have been higher up in my class. And then if you're higher up in your class, you get more opportunities to do like law review and all these, and then possibly work for a firm that's setting you up, right out of law school. All of those things, it plays into your future.
Yep.
But yeah, it's never discussed. Accommodations aren't discussed. I think people just jump to the conclusion that, either you can't hack it, you're not smart enough. I don't know if in law schools, I know if you can get a certain percentage of people get kicked out after the first year,
Mhm.
you know?
I think that's in every graduate program.
So
I know I felt that way in social work too.
are they going to those people and saying, hey, do you have a learning disability? Hey, do you need accommodations? Hey,
Right. Mm-mm,
all it's there, people are not asking these questions.
mm-mm. Yeah, if you can't hack it, you're out.
Can't hack it, you're out.
But my
Yeah.
thing is, like, if they were to ask you, oh, do you have a learning disability? Like, how would a lot of people even know that?
Right.
That's like a thing that they would have to go do the research on, or know somebody that knows that information, or go to a doctor to be able to access that knowledge.
Mhm.
I don't think it'd be as easy as them coming to say, hey, do you have a learning disability? And even then, that's kind of touching on people's
Privacy rights.
privacy. Yeah.
Mhm.
But like having out maybe a poster about learning disabilities and the different outcomes, or I can't think of the word right now, but
Well, and
examples.
when you think about like IQ tests or what are the entry exams for
LSAT,
college,
GMAT, and
how they are what's the word for it when they're prejudiced against people with certain cultural backgrounds, and also they are I would say discriminating against people with um, different thinking styles, or you know and so when I think about that, one of the things that is so important for me to say is that in my life, some of the most creative, loving, transformational people that I have met in my lifetime were had some of these challenges that we've talked about,
yeah,
have had trauma that they had to overcome, and had barriers to education and healthcare and all of those things. And what happens in my mind with that is that we are wasting a valuable resource as a um, as a nation and as a world, really. I don't know in other countries if they are more, if their services, their education and their healthcare and that sort of thing are more accessible. But if in the point is that in creating these false barriers, in my mind, they're false barriers. They're unnecessary. They don't serve a good purpose in my mind. But what they do is cut the rest of us off from those people that could provide a richness in our lives. Does that make sense?
yeah.
So, like for instance, I'm in recovery from substance use disorders and mental illness. And I was fortunate to get into recovery pretty young. And I was also fortunate to find a community of people that were also in recovery. So that gave me some supports and some resources that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because I didn't have family. And um, now I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I hate that.
Well, you're just talking about,
Oh, okay. So what I was thinking is that I have known several people who went into graduate school, and like you said, they were, they were considered uh, not salvageable in some way. They weren't worth going the extra mile in order to keep them in school. And these people would have been excellent social workers or attorneys or public health officials, but because we're discarding them in some ways. We're not helping them to succeed, then we're basically robbed of those people's resources. That's one thing. And the other thing that I wanted to make sure and mention is that I can really see how, when you were talking about the fishbowl earlier, I can really see how valuable it is to have people with lived experience providing mentorship and education. One of the things that happened in my first quarter in school is we were to put together something for an agency that would help their clients in some way. And I remember talking to these women that were supporting me in recovery. And one of them said, "You'll just put a panel together and bring us in and we'll tell them how it is in recovery. You know, we'll tell them what the challenges are and how we overcame it." And it was such a powerful moment for me to realize that I had these women in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that they were showing me a way to live that was beyond, like I said earlier, beyond my imagination. I couldn't have imagined it unless I were in contact with these people.
Yeah, I hear you saying peer support. You know, peer support's really important. But
Mhm.
I keep saying this in my interviews because actually peer support keeps coming up. But well-paid peer support. Well
Right.
support that they have power. They have a seat at the table, they're peers, but they have a seat at the table at the higher
Mhm.
echelons of the organization so that they can make
Mhm.
changes based on what they're doing on the ground.
And
Not
when
this,
you're
oh,
talking,
that formerly incarcerated, oh, that woman that was
right.
on.
So and what we call people matters. So why not call them peer consult? Or because they're not only helping, this is one of the things, I worked at the VA for a number of years, and we had peer support, but I saw them as experts. You know, they were a resource for me because they had expert knowledge of this, of the challenges of this population.
Yeah.
And I don't think people fully understand, yes, they're an expert, but also it takes a certain person to have gone through an experience and then are able to articulate that experience. So that is an expertise.
Articulate and navigate.
Mhm.
And like we were talking about earlier too, Sarai, that where those of us with lived experience and a degree, for instance, we're bridges, because we're able to explain or provide an example for folks that are coming up behind us with the similar lived experience. And we're also able to articulate to those people who are trying to help, but they're in a fishbowl too. They don't know how to help. They think they do because they have this, environment that keeps supporting that view, but they don't necessarily know how to help. That was one of the very humbling things for me, to be in an organization that does utilize peer specialists, is that I realized how little I knew, and I also had a resource to learn more.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to end this just so it's not too long, but I would like each one of us to keep thinking on this topic and possibly do a follow-up to this video. I think, once we kind of think about what we've said and the ideas, that our brains will start working, and we can come back and I hope we can talk more about this because I think it's an important conversation. So
I love it.
I think thanks to both of you, and
Thanks for the opportunity. This is fun.
yeah.
Thanks, Mom.
Okay. I love you guys.
Love you. Bye.